brilliant pieces on the board, we can talk about this next question and take it up one level, because so the question is basically how we can keep bottom-up democracy strong in our organizations, but still build power, still have equity, particularly racial equity that we've been talking about. And I think for me, the background of this question, what I'm really interested in hearing from all of you is, I know where I work at Maine People's Alliance, we all got into organizing because the problem of this world is there's all these rich, powerful people at the top who control the resources and have all the power. And so we want to bust that up, bottom-up democracy. But then one of the real challenges I think we've experienced is in this moment where there are, there's kind of an unevenness in terms of who is actually getting mobilized around what right now. And if you, as Nelini was talking about, you just kind of open up the doors, and suddenly if you're basing your tactical and strategic decisions on who is really excited to show up, some groups are getting just an outside amount of influence on where groups are going than others. And you add on to that, you got to talk to funders and figure out how that works, and your allies over here. And, it's a lot of competing concerns to try to balance out. And it seems hard to just say, oh, well, everybody just has one vote, and then, we'll just go with whatever that decides. So I'm really curious to hear how you all are handling this.
I mean,
Ben, yeah, James, you got it. Yeah.
Well, we definitely don't have all the answers. I mean, we are still figuring out. So I can just tell you, some of the stuff that we're been wrestling with, because this is really a tough dynamic. I mean, you think, we're trying to build, so we're a membership organization. We have regional chapters, and then we have like a statewide leadership committee in each state that helps basically make most of the decisions that our organization makes. And so this question around how do you have democracy given this race and class dynamic, is what I was kind of getting at before. Like, you have to go into it consciously. If you just say, we're gonna have a democratic organization, and you open it up, the people who get there first are gonna really kind of control with the direction of the organization, take up a lot of the oxygen, and make it somebody else's organization than the people you really want to join. So we're always having to really figure out, who are the people that are not here that we need to be inviting to come and being in relationship with to join our organization. And then also, when we say, we use this concept around like building a bigger we, and we used to, always think about it as like building people power for us, like, how do we get more members? But building a bigger we for us is also not only building a bigger, organization that we're building, but helping our partner organizations build bigger organizations, and building, a stronger constellation of movement organizations that are working together strongly, including, again, we're in these small rural states, but, the people of color led organizations, there's a powerful organization organizing farm workers in our communities called Migrant Justice. They're just organizing dairy farm workers. We as an organization that's primarily trying to build political power and fight for issues on a local and state level, can do a whole lot of solidarity work in their struggles, and building that solidarity culture, has been really critical. A couple of other just really key, steps that we've taken is in both states, we've recently been able to hire a political director. We call a movement politics director. And we had a kind of a matrix going into that process, but we really we're excited to be able to basically find two of the most powerful women of color social movement leaders in each of our two states to play that role. And so our political leadership on our staff level is coming from there, even though our staff is primarily white. We have those incredible leaders, Kaya Morris and Esma Alhouni, being able to lead our political work, and building a caucus of both members, and then also a BIPOC caucus, or leaders from the most impacted communities from the global majority in all the coalition work that we do, to be able to make sure that all our decisions are as much as possible being able to be led by most impacted communities.
Yeah. I know that I don't think any of us have it figured out, but I think that's the beauty of it, is that we're all trying new things, and at the essence, right, we have to try new things. So during this time, what we saw at OneAmerica was that we weren't necessarily increasing the amount of core leaders that we were bringing in, but we were increasing their leadership growth and development. So we were able to have a flourishing grassroots leadership council that operated like a board, who made the strategic decisions of who isn't at the table, how do we bring them in, and not just because they're not here, but because we're in relationship with them as well, right? And we also launched a leadership institute for 3 months this summer, where we taught folks like how to a digital equity, right? We taught folks how to get on Zoom. This is our new realities at the moment, right? And so we didn't want the most impacted communities and frankly our base, right, to feel like they had no outlet or no place in the movement now that everything was virtual and we couldn't get out in the streets for that moment in time, right? So we were able to test out a lot of new things and not necessarily, and really focus on who were the people that weren't necessarily speaking the loudest, as was mentioned by James, but really who was invested in it and who would grow from it. So we had a mix of all the right folks in the room to make those decisions happen and make the strategy happen and flourish. So like we took stock and we noticed that in the last 6 months, we were able to grow leaders' progress. We have a tracker that they have access to, like what's their self-interest? What are they moving now? What do they want to see in their community? What's happening in their schools? And we saw folks grow by 46%, right? Because we had the right folks in the room who knew what the community needed and what was going to make a difference back at home, that we were able to inform that strategy of how to move forward. We don't have it all figured out, but we learned how it is that our policy department and our organizing department work together to build legislation and not have legislation passed down to us anymore, right? So in these times where we're doing virtual things, it forced us to reevaluate how is it that we're building grassroots leadership power in a space where we had to slow down a little bit and reevaluate. So I think that if we continue this, even when we get to hug each other again and celebrate all of the victories virtually, the lessons that we've learned from this time of how to really build grassroots power does not go away. And I think that's like the most valuable lesson here is like, we have to be in these rooms sharing what we're learning, because that's how we win. We don't necessarily just win by saying, who has the answer to this question, right? Okay, we're gonna follow you. But how do we get into these roundtable conversations and figure it out together nationally?
I mean, this is something that we're coming new to, right? I think it's, Working Families Party for such a long time, in some ways was democratic in terms of in New York and our founding, where we actually have a ballot line and a structure, where we have a state committee and need to actually call to order and endorse people based on our folks. And then in ways that we expanded through the model over time, we were a bunch of organizations making decisions for their bases, but not necessarily building a base of our own that had people that were, a part of the party in real fundamental ways. And so, I think that one of the things that's really important is that I think this is what I struggle with, and I still struggle with this in organizations, is how do you have democratic processes that are also not a bunch of hoops people have to jump through to actually get into leadership or to be involved? Because I think for such a long time, older organizing models were based on, the time, space, place, and conditions, right? We're based on this, a boss and a shop and a union shop, right? We had different ways of relating to each other as well in the world, both in our workplaces and our personal lives. And we didn't have technology. And then I think, because people's actual real conditions have gotten worse in terms of like the extra time that they have. And so I find this balance where, yeah, I want people to make a time commitment and a commitment to be a part of our democratic structures, but I also don't want it to be a whole nother job if they're already struggling, you know, and that's a balance. I think that nobody has actually gotten to that balance yet, because if they would, I'd be like, give me the model. And so I think that's really important, right? Because if I'm going to be really honest, then I can just speak for some organizations I know and ones that I've seen, like a lot of organizations, I think, are at places where leadership transitions a lot. And I don't mean staff, I just mean actually base leadership and people who are involved, or it's the same people who have been there since 1983 or whatever founding year. And, you know, and and that's really hard. And especially where I think that, you know, for me as somebody who is like a gamer, and in my past life, and I'm becoming a gamer again because COVID, what else are you gonna do? And you know, and also I'm in a lot of fandom communities where there's self-organizing based on, you know, you're a fan of everything from, you know, The Witcher to Westworld to whatever fandom it is. They have the One Direction pop fandoms, like I don't understand that, but there are people who are organizing in different ways. So for me, I think it's just like, I still fundamentally believe we need people who are in charge, like people in leadership in our organizations leading the way. But how do we get there on a level of scale and a level of where people don't feel like, oh, I did these 2 levels and now I can't anymore because it's been too much work, right? What is that balance there? So I think it's, for me, like a really, really important thing. And it's a thing that I think we've been struggling with. I know that we've been struggling within the organization of getting to scale and bringing masses of people in and getting them in and actually bringing them of a ladder of engagement, but also not having a 20 ladder of engagement. By the time they complete it, they could have like taken a college course or some shit like that. Excuse my language. But, you know, so that's like I think that's the tension that I kind of see on democratic processes. And then there's the other thing, right? This is why I think the other piece I'll say is the reason why we need to solve it is because what a lot of movements have turned into, and I'm really happy we didn't, so many people tried to convince me or others, not that I had not that I ruled Occupy Wall Street, but like people try to convince you, like, why'd you just start an Occupy organization? And I was like, no, this is the movement. But a lot of movements and a lot of marches have turned into organizations and institutionalized. And part of that is because I think it's a failure on the institutions that have been there to actually provide really like pathways for people that aren't jumping through hoops, or aren't that you have to be buddies for years with somebody to get into leadership of a position. And so you have things that have used distributed organizing and it's distributed tools, and people are like, I can make the decisions. I am the head of this so-and-so organization here because I started it and I'm with my community. There's a complete downside to that too, because then you're not accountable. And then there's all of that stuff that comes with it. But there's also the beauty of people making decisions for themselves and directing themselves where to go, and it being easy for them to onboard. So I feel like it's this time will tell question that at some point, I think somebody's gonna have the answer to. But I think we're getting better, but I do think that that it both has led to each other.
Yeah. Well, yeah, go ahead, Kendall.
Yeah, I was just going to add like a few things, but I think y'all pretty much said it all. One thing that I want to lift up that I think is really important to name is unionizing our workforces. I think that that's like a critical piece for progressive organizations to be unionizing as a way to be building worker power. So I want to lift that up. And then also just like Nelini, what you were speaking to was bringing up for me the tension around democratic process and also building models that are decentralized. Like, what is the role of kind of like unleashing movement projects or strategies that are built to be like picked up and led in a decentralized way, and the downfalls of that, and also like, yeah, what is the relationship to that, to being able to get to scale, and how does that work within democratic processes, or like what is the experimentation being done that kind of holds both of those models together? I'm not sure. I would love to hear if y'all have some ideas, but that's something that was coming up for me, and thinking a lot about, you know, the idea of fractals and patterns of like the way we are in relationship to each other, the way that we are working, even on smaller scales at our organizations, the way that, you know, reverberates out, and how that I think is a key piece when thinking about, you know, how are we keeping our organizations bottom up with sharp strategy and ensuring equity. You know, it is kind of about like, who are the decision makers at those smaller tables? How are those folks in relationship to each other? What are those processes that are set up to support leadership and development? And that kind of, like those patterns, if they're healthy or if they're toxic, like reverberate out throughout your organization. And so how are we getting better about being in practice around being able to recognize and acknowledge those patterns? Because I think that's like a core part of how we do the work that doesn't necessarily always get verbalized. And I think, Arleen, you were talking a lot about that in terms of bringing folks to the table and, you know, working it out together, and then how that translates into like how the work moves through the world. And yeah, I think that's a core part of it.
I'm really curious to see what folks would say in answer to that question Kendall posed, particularly about the decentralization and the fractals. That's a good word to have in the vocabulary. And one thing that everything that folks have said that just struck me as an observation is that I think a lot of people were talking about that sort of middle level of the organization. So not just straight up votes from the rank and file members, not like the top tippy top board level decisions, but like the consciousness that James was talking about, the training investments, the work plans around who you spend your time with. Like a lot of these things I think are underappreciated in terms of determining, whether equity is real, whether grassroots bottom-up democracy is real. And they're squishier. But let's see what folks think. What do people think about Kendall's question about how to do decentralized fractal kind of organizing in this context?
I mean, I have lots of thoughts about a lot of things that you said. I also have a thought about the unionizing workplaces.
That's good. Yeah, you just dropped that bomb. We should talk about that too.
That was a bomb that was dropped that I think that is. I mean, I think it's something that's interesting. But I'll go to the distributed stuff first, and the decentralized. I mean, I think, you know, people. I mean, I said this before in the context of like gaming and fandom and all of this stuff. People are organizing decentralized. People are doing it. All of the teams on TikTok. Two of my friends' kids were part of those teams that did the Oklahoma TikTok stuff, and it was real. And then they found, I think, Stephen Miller's credit card and started bought a pair of pants, and that stuff is already organically happening in communities because we have different micro communities. We're not for the most part, and it's not everywhere, but for the most part, people have communities that they have that are their social networks in their communities, but they also have their online, and I don't mean just Twitter or social media. I'm just saying there's different communities that people make. And so I think that when we're talking about decentralized organizing, the power and the beauty of it is, again, anybody can kind of take up some of the stuff that you can't always do, but there is models of it, is enforce principles and enforce some grounding. And a lot of folks say, oh, well, if it's decentralized, it's got to be white. I think that there's this narrative in progressive and organization spaces, but there's actually a lot of things we can point to that are decentralized movements that were Black and Brown led. It's just, I think it is actually the way that we teach them, because I find often, to be honest, that people will teach how 350 built, rather than how Not One More built as a campaign for Not One More deportation, right? And I think that's on like us in progressive spaces to actually show the examples. And I'm not no shade on any organization, but like show the examples that were led by Black and brown folks, that are led by working class folks, that are led by, you know, rural folks as well, indigenous communities. And I think that like, I think that the other thing is that there's so much power that has been built around decentralization. And also we have to understand what has been done and what hasn't. We've shifted narrative, but a lot of things we have not won yet. You know, like we have not won some things. Like we have not yet achieved some of the victories that we have to achieve, partially because we're in this administration, but partially also because there are some things I think about decentralized organizing there that doesn't allow us to win certain victories. It allows us to shift the narrative. It's really big. It has these big wings, and the depth to get some of the work done, that's like the targeting and the this and the that we do trade as organizers, isn't there all the time. And so I think that for me, that's where the like fracture happens, when it's like, when people are, because we can say, yes, you have this big distributed, we did that with Resist Trump Tuesdays. But our goal was with Resist Trump Tuesdays, which was, you know, a weekly Tuesday thing in the beginning of the administration, to get people out on the streets to call their senators and help, and they could do whatever. Our main thing was to honestly make sure that everybody knew who the cabinet was. It wasn't about like, we didn't think we were going to defeat a cabinet pick. We did defeat one, but it still was somebody else that was terrible. So it didn't really matter in that sense. But our goal was to make sure everybody in this country knew the names of the cabinet, and making sure that people got activated and had something to do post Women's March, which was a thing that people were all gearing towards. And having all these distributed things that came out, indivisible, all that, have something to go to. But it's not like we won, but we shifted things. That's great. I'm glad that people know the cabinet and started to take on fights and had the healthcare conversations there. So it is always going to be a yes and for me, and a seesaw. And then on the, just really quickly on the, or we can talk about the unionization thing in a second, but I'm just gonna bring it. I think that, you know, I mean, our workplace is unionized. I support the union. I'm in leadership of the organization and all of that stuff. And I also am like, seeing a strategy that I don't think understands the power dynamics of people in leadership of institutions, particularly progressive organizations, and like the complex there. I think a lot of people are unionizing in their workplaces because they want to be in charge of strategy in terms of progressive organizations. And I do want people to have like, I remember the days where I was paid nothing and working at an institution being like, we have to embody those values. There's a difference between embodying values and also wanting to be at the strategy setting table and at these places. And I've seen a lot of, and I'm not even talking from where we are at, but I've seen union campaigns also mostly led by white folks with new black leadership and brown leadership. And there's a power dynamic that's happening with these unionization campaigns in workplaces that I continue to see. It's like black leader takes over a person of color, white folks in the organization unionize, and we got to start talking about that.
This is getting good. Okay. Arleen, James, Virginia, anything you want to throw in on any of these topics?
I mean, in terms of the distributed organizing, I think I would tend to agree that there's like a time and a place for it. But then when it comes to winning and making sure that you have a target and a power analysis, I don't think we're at the point yet where organizers don't have a job, right? We're trying to organize ourselves out of a job, but we're not there yet. And so there's always going to be a need at the moment, right, for an organizer to be in the center of figuring out what is the next step to move a target or a win. I think that we in our organization have seen distributed organizing work super effectively, primarily around the civic engagement season. And then we can turn those contacts back into our base and not necessarily find the loudest voices in the room, but the people who want to continue to do the work, right? So it's like casting a wide net with many folks and giving them the experience to understand like what it is to organize yourself out of a job, but then you're casting the net back to figure out how do you win what you've already launched, right? When I think about fractalizing organizing, I think about testing out new things, figuring out like what are the little pilots, right? For where we aren't yet, or what are the things that we have to try in order to expand and make sure that we're being, like we're trying to solve that problem of like, how are we a democratic organization and really following our grassroots leaders? I think more on that end, and then seeing distributed organizing as one of those pilots, and not necessarily the way to de-silo.
I agree with a lot of what Arleen and Nelini have said on this. I mean, I think for me, you know, I started organizing without a cell phone, like in more than 2 decades ago. So it's been fascinating to see, so we have to be remaking all of like the ways that we build organizations, the way that we build relationships with people, the way we try to help, you know, be able to have people take collective action together. As you mentioned, you know, I started organizing, trying to help people build unions and organize in their workplaces. And, you know, the cards are stacked against us in this country to build back the labor movement that we had in previous decades. You know, in terms of union density and having that kind of power. But when you live in a, you know, capitalist economy, you obviously have, you know, the counterweight to that is organized labor, to organize capital. So we have to figure out how to do that across the country, you know, being able to sort of build power for people to take collective action to change their lives. And I think it is a process of continuing to try different techniques to do it. You know, what has happened since the pandemic, you know, has made all of our organizations have to rethink pretty much everything, the way we interact with people. I think, as Arleen mentioned before, like we're going to learn a whole lot, build a whole lot of organizing muscles that we're going to be able to use even when we can see each other and hug each other again. So we'll have to be continuing to test that. One thing that I got, I think, from Eliane at Take Action Minnesota, when we were trying to think about this exact question around how do you balance trying to build leadership and like to have that leadership members, but needing to have mass members. And they were saying that they had at Take Action kind of 2 strategies, and we've been sort of dabbling in that, and sort of like having some organizers that are focused on building a mass base and trying to like organize massive amount of people. You know, Maine does this also. You know, but then having some organizers focus on that deep base and really kind of going deep with people and trying to build with those folks, because it is hard to do the same thing at the same time if you're an organizer. So, you know, basically having kind of a deep-based department and a mass-based department and building our organization like that. So that's one way we've been thinking about it, you know, as we try to now wrestle with all these different, you know, virtual tactics.
Awesome.